we're going to talk a good amount about equilibrium interest rates. So I think it's useful to step back and say, okay, well, what does equilibrium mean? Most students have a very hazy idea. So if we can get like a good idea of what we mean by equilibrium, everything else will become more easy. And particularly in finance, so we're in finance, not necessarily economics. So we have a more powerful argument in finance that I usually use, and we prefer to use whenever we can, and that's arbitrage, right? So in investments, we could say, given this construction of the world, the Black-Scholes world, I can tell you exactly what the option price is going to be, and if it isn't that, then I can generate free money. Right, and I will generate, just me, right, or one individual will generate free money until they push the price to the arbitrage price. So arbitrage is a very powerful method of pricing. So we use it whenever we can because it tells us the exact price, and if it deviates, you can make as much money as long as there's that deviation there, and then that will. And then from a pricing standpoint, one market participant can push the price to the proper price, right? And that makes a lot of sense because we make a lot of assumptions in economics that homogeneous expectations, either or that everyone's kind of the same, but everyone isn't the same. Some people in markets know a lot more than others. So knowing that one market participant in arbitrage can notice it and push the price to its no arbitrage price makes a lot more sense than what we're going to talk about here. It's not to say equilibrium is bad, it's just that we use equilibrium arguments when we cannot use arbitrage arguments. So we'll talk a little bit about the difference between what equilibrium means, what goes into an equilibrium price, and then what we've just talked about is how that is different and sort of less strong than arbitrage. So when we talk about an equilibrium, first thing to kind of note is that an equilibrium takes everyone, right? So what we're doing when we're looking at the supply and demand for loanable funds, but this could, so this is our interest rate, this is the price of loanable funds, and that's the quantity of loanable funds. And we could do this for crude oil, and everything's the same. But what this takes is, the supply curve for loanable funds. This is how much for each quantity level, right? Or for each interest rate, it's better to say that way. For each interest rate, how much funds will be supplied. So this is adding together, household supply of loanable funds. If loanable funds are going to be supplied by the Fed, right? Businesses and so forth. So this kind of takes everyone in the economy who might and foreign suppliers and so forth, loanable funds, and then aggregates them all into this one curve. So to know the supply curve, we have to kind of know how much everyone would supply. And that's similar, it's the same thing with demand. We have to know how much everyone, how much businesses, at each interest rate, how much businesses, households, governments, and so forth would demand, right? So right there, with a no arbitrage price, this is very different. This is talking about everyone in the economy. There's really no one in a no arbitrage price. And knowing this kind of helps us understand what we mean by equilibrium. So I like to introduce equilibrium as a sort of stuff stops happening. So in other words, at this point, which is an equilibrium, right? The quantity, we have supply and demand, so are equal. So whoever wanted at this interest rate, whoever wanted to supply funds, and whoever wanted to demand funds has done it, right? At that point, and then what this means is, let's say the supply curve changes, right? So the supply is reduced, right? So we move to this S sub 2, and we move to this new equilibrium. Well, what this means because we know the supply curve is everyone, this takes sort of the aggregation of everyone changes, right? Everyone, I reduce my supply of loanable funds, so it's kind of like the averaging of what everyone in the economy has done. But the idea is, so everyone is changing, right? But when the supply curves hits here, we kind of hit the equilibrium again, and everyone has changed, so nothing new happens, if that makes sense. You can kind of think of the equilibrium as everyone stops trading, right? And that's what happens. New information comes into this market. It shifts the supply and demand curve. That by definition means everyone is adjusting their behavior. How much I'm borrowing, how much I'm lending. And then, once I've adjusted, it's in the equilibrium again, and the market clears, and there's you can kind of think of trading stops. And then, so the shifts in these demands and supply curves are everyone adjusting, right? And equilibrium is kind of when it's adjusted, right? And people can, and we hit a stable point again. And so that's what we mean by equilibrium. And to reiterate, I touched on this point before. What this means is, we do this equilibrium price. Okay, so this is the equilibrium interest rate now, right? So equilibrium interest rate's 4%. This only really gives us an idea of what the price might be. It is not exact. So when I say the Black-Scholes value of this option is $5, that means the price has to be $5 in a Black-Scholes world. When we do equilibrium arguments, we can't really know there's no way for us to draw the supply and demand curve for loanable funds and say that's what the interest rate should be, because we don't know everyone. I don't know where you're willing to supply loanable funds and so forth. So this is just what equilibrium arguments are useful in doing is understanding how people would react. I would reduce my supply of loanable funds, and then what would happen to interest rates, right? So we're not pricing something here. We're not saying, this is what interest rates should be. What we're doing is it's a useful tool to understand, how people would shift, how interest rates would change, in other words. So what we can think about when we're doing here is we're not looking at, that should be the interest rate. We're saying, well, let's understand how the interest rate would change, and that's where this equilibrium argument comes in, because it's not practical to know everyone's supply and demand curve and then create it and actually price it. And so that's where, again, it's very different from arbitrage. So as we do more of these, understanding how economic growth affects interest rates, how changes in inflation affect interest rates. We're going to do that. We're going to use these equilibrium arguments, and I hope this gives you a little background on the constraints of the equilibrium argument, what they're used for, and how it's more of an understanding and not an exact pricing. And that's not to say that that's unimportant, right? I've worked a lot in industry, and the understanding of how you talk to a lot of bankers, and then how changes in inflation expectations are going to affect mortgage rates, and that is really important. Just understanding the direction of where not to say, because what I'm saying is, I won't be able to say mortgage rates will be exactly 8%, but knowing that, okay, mortgage rates are now 6% and inflation expectations are going to increase, then I, as I'm managing my bank, I know that mortgage rates are going to go up, and getting a natural feel for how interest rates are going to react to macroeconomic factors is extremely important, and it allows you in a very practical manner to manage a bank and manage a business. So equilibrium arguments are very important, but maybe it's a little bit deceiving when we start saying that this is going to give us our intersecting supply demand, and that's the price. Well, that's not the important thing here, right? The important thing is understanding how it, the factors that affect that equilibrium price to change. Great. Have a great day.